Welcome to Author Conversations again. And yes, I'm Chris Dabbs again, your host for today. And today I'm joined by Dr. René Vázquez del Valle, a psychotherapist, an educator, and author of Head, Heart, and Crotch Connections: How Not to Fail in Search of Your Perfect Union. So this is going to be interesting, I think. Now, René has spent more than 3 decades helping people navigate, well, basically some of life's most complex emotional challenges. His career has included clinical leadership roles within New York's mental health services, work with the LGBT community, university teaching, and private psychotherapy. So, drawing on that extensive experience, his latest book explores one of the questions that has fascinated people for generations. Now, here we go. Why do some relationships thrive while others fail? Well, his answer centers on three fundamental human conditions: the head, the heart, and physical intimacy, arguing that lasting relationships depend on achieving balance between all three rather than just relying on chemistry alone. So today, we'll explore the psychology behind successful relationships, the lessons René has learned from decades of clinical practice, and the practical advice that he hopes readers will take into their own lives. So René, after that introduction, welcome to Author Conversations. It's great to meet you.
Well, thank you for having me. Yes.
Oh, no, no, not a problem. I think this is going to be very interesting for our listeners and readers as well. So, not only about the book, but also about listening to what you said, what you say, really about relationships, because everybody's interested in their relationships, right? So, let's kick off with the first question then. What do you want the reader who's going to be picking up your book, hoping for advice, to understand, first of all, by the title before they even pick up your book?
Yes. Well, the title Head Heart Crotch, it's like a modern distillation of an older concept of mind, body, spirit that was, originally developed by the Greeks. They coined the phrase because in their way of thinking, the perfectly developed individual was that person, right, who worked on their mind, their body, and their spirit. Um, So when I refer to head, heart, crotch, I'm also referring to mental, emotional, and sexual connections. You know, um, the title that I coined it that because it was basically inspired by my patients who I worked with, and for them, when I presented this conceptualization of head, heart, crotch, it was an easy formula that they could connect to. They were able to see their difficulties or their failures in relationships in terms of easily saying, I have, intellectual, mental connection, or I have an emotional connection, or I have a physical connection, sexual, or I don't, or it's somewhere it's failing, you know. So that's how the title came about. And what I want people to understand, like by the title, is that connections involve alignments, right? Alignments among those three spheres. You know, where are you developing your connections? Where are you failing to develop those connections? Where are they faltering? Which are the strong ones? Which are the weak ones? Um, the second part of the subtitle, you know, how not to fail in search of your perfect union, I focus on how not to fail rather than the concept of success because there are a lot of books on how to succeed, right? But none, like the five love languages, how to succeed in marriage without having to talk about it, a whole array of books on success, but none that focus really on failure. So in a sense, if you don't know how something fails, you don't really know how it succeeds or recognize a possible demise, right? Um, right now, we know that according to the APA, right, 50% of marriages fail, first time marriages, and that 65% of second marriages fail. So, in the face of those high rates of divorce, I explore failure, you know. Uh, and for many of my patients, failure was used as kind of like a signpost where they could confront those difficulties, you know. For many individuals. failure is very elusive. It's hidden away from consciousness. They don't know what happened a lot of times, and or they experience a lot of shame because of a failed relationship. So the purpose of the second subtitle is to, in a way, demystify and destigmatize failure in general in relationships.
That's a good point, isn't it? You know, at the end of the day, so what you're helping people to do is to I kind of recognize the signs of failure, I guess, and then being able to adapt their behavior towards, well, at least recognizing it and dealing with it. No, that's very true. Um, yeah, that's fascinating, actually. I mean, obviously, the title, it immediately catches people's attention, doesn't it? I mean, it would do. And now that you've explained it, fully, it obviously was deliberate from the beginning, and because you wanted to really kind of tell everybody exactly what was going on, and your ideas, and making sure that they're accurately represented in the book, right?
If I titled it Mind, Body, Spirit Connections, probably nobody would buy it, right? Nobody, it wouldn't catch attention, right?
No, no, exactly. Because, like you say, they've already got 10 books that are all about that, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. I think that, this is the whole point. I mean, I'm on my second marriage, okay? And you did scare me when you said 65% of second marriages fail.
Yeah.
I mean, mind you, I've been with my wife, my second wife, for a long time. So it's quite, 25 years, actually. So that's quite a long time, I think. So I think I'm doing reasonably okay. Not saying that we got through it early. Well, rather. But, I mean, you've worked with people for more than 30 years. You must have seen all sorts of stuff going on. But, were there recurring patterns that you kept seeing, that eventually convinced you that you needed and you must write this book for people?
I think it's not so much recurring patterns, but uh, where you begin to see a relationship fail, for example, is because of the nature of the disconnections, where the person fails to recognize or they undervalue the nature of their connections, whether it's emotional connection, mental, or sexual connection. If they don't see that there's a vulnerability or a lack of connection in one or two of those areas, they don't recognize how that affects the intimacy, you know? So working with them, I got them to identify what their connections actually are. Um, some of the things that cause like failures in relationships sometimes has to do with the person's ability, their stick to itness, their willingness to stay in connected. Do they employ like a flight or fight response in the nature of their connections? Do they fight to stay connected or do they flee immediately when there's a problem? The people who fight for a connection are what I used to call the worried well, you know, whereas the people who would flee were the walking wounded. They often don't have the resilience and the strength to stay in a relationship. Other reasons why a relationship could fail has to do a lot with like what we call fantasy bonds, where you connect to someone based on what you wish they would be for you, rather than what they actually are, right? Uh, Other reasons why failures are happening have to do a lot with modes of communication, the way we're communicating now, through technological use of, social media. I think we're probably have more means of communicating and saying less and less. We talk now in snippets and sound bites, which do not foster connection. They actually inhibit connection and create disconnection sometimes when you misinterpret what people are saying to you, over texting and things like this. So all that is also influencing, you know, success and failure rates.
So, I speak to authors who write about perhaps maybe social media, and how it affects us at the moment, and then other people who are talking about relationships as well. And that this comes across a lot. People nowadays, and I know, look, grey hair, I'm old, okay, so I'm going to start going on down the old social media kind of route, but I think it's really true. My 2 children are coming up to around about 30 now, and they just about escaped the worst of it, I think. But if I look at my niece, or nieces, I should say, not just one, but and other people that I teach, because I also teach at the university, and so all of those people, you can see that it's different, and you can see that, yes, the sound bites, you've hit it right there, it is literally type, 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 text, or not even text, WhatsApp, whatever it is. And so, I mean, do you think that because of this, right, people think that there should be that right person in the world, that they think their compatibility is just about finding that right person. And because of this, they're really fast to choose. And so this is why we have dating apps that are basically swipe left,
Well,
swipe right.
they're fast to connect and they're fast to disconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I call it technological disconnections, right? Where you get rejected online. They don't even meet with you anymore. They either begin to connect with you and then something happens, and before you know it, they've ghosted you, right? And you have no idea how or what you connected to. It was never real discussion of it, an exploration of it. So it occurs a lot, especially now, you know.
Which is really, again, quite sorry to keep going on about me, but this is why I find it quite exciting. I met my second wife 25 years ago on Match.com, believe it or not, right? So quite amazing, really. So what I did is I purposely widened my sphere to look for people who are outside of my immediate area, because normally we would go to work. Obviously, we meet people at work, we meet people through friends, we meet people maybe, socially out. But I thought I'd do that. And I must admit, it was quite an interesting ride, even back then. And of course, when I tell millennials and whoever else that we met 25 years ago at Match.com, they're like, what? Was it even around then? The internet wasn't even around. Anyway, so, but I'd say our relationship is reasonably successful, to be fair. Do you think that there are skills that can be learned by people well, yeah, let me ask that question. Are there skills?
Absolutely. They're actionable skills. And what I call the 6 W's of connection, where you begin to identify the who, the why, the what, the which, the where, and the when of your connection. So when you say who, what is the type of person that you connect with? The why, what is it? Why do you find that person attractive? What would be, what is the order of your preference or your connection? Is it head, heart, crotch? Is it heart, crotch, head? What is it that, for example, which are your preferences, for example? Do you prefer a head, heart, crotch connection, or do you start off with a crotch, heart, head connection? Any permutation of those, right? Uh, the where is your strongest connection, right? Where is your weakest connection? The when does something not work? So those 6 W's are skills that you explore and you have them consider to analyze that, and not only analyze their 6 W's of connection, but which is sometimes harder for them to do, is to analyze their partner's connection to them.
Ooh, yeah, I bet.
Your partner likes about you in terms of head, heart, crotch, right? Because you'll find that sometimes it's not what they thought it was many times. The partner will all of a sudden tell them, no, that's not the order of my connection to you, right? I like this, this, and this. So that synchronicity in connection sometimes has to occur where you understand your connection and you understand their connection to you. It's vitally important, you know?
No, yeah, I suppose it is. And breaking it down like that, your framework is basically suggesting intellectual, emotional, and sexual connections. And you're kind of saying that they all need to work together. And I can see that. If you break it down, analyze it, and look at what's going on, then yeah, that's
What you
fine.
do is basically you question their connection. So intellectually, do you value the way they think, their values, their thoughts, what they espouse, how they express themselves? Do you value that? Do you enjoy it? Emotionally, do you appreciate their emotional expression towards you? Are they gentle? Are they kind? Are they loving? Are they giving? You know, that is analyzing the emotional part. Sexually, are they willing to please? Is the relationship mutually gratifying or is it self-centered, one-sided? That's the way you look at each one of those spheres and question it and determine what is it that I'm looking at when I look at head, heart, crotch, right? Mhm.
And so, so what actually usually happens then when someone is more focused on one of them? It doesn't have to, I guess it can be any of them, right? So what happens when one of those three is significantly stronger
Is
than the
missing
others?
or strong. Well, usually the stronger one they don't have to work on. It's always the weaker connection, right? The weakest link, like to show you,
Yeah.
that you have to consider. I get them to look at the words that they use because words create our experiences, um, they define our lived encounters, you know. So I get them to use nuanced, descriptive words to describe those connections. The more nuanced and the more descriptive, the more you create internal imagery, right? And that imagery then creates bonds of attachment. And bonds of attachment is what increases your connection. So if I used to like if a patient would come to me and say, "Oh, I like him, he's very bright." That's the intellect. He's bright, but that's not enough because it's not nuanced and described. You know, could you say more about that person? Could you say they're curious, they're open-minded, they're sophisticated, they're intellectual, they're unbiased, they're impartial? The more nuance and descriptive words you use, the more you make that connection and to that an attachment to that person, be it intellectual, be it emotional. So if you're able to say more than just that he's a loving person, can you say he's heartwarming, forgiving, trusting, um, spiritual, pessimistic? And then looking at the contrasting states, if what you're suffering from is that your perception is that the person is envious, jealous, vengeful, depressed, distrustful, that imprints on your being, right? And you're not seeing the other side of the coin. So getting them to see contrasting states in their description and what they ascribe to their relationship is very important. It can overcome disinhibition, it can disconnection, it can create attachment where attachment wasn't there, you know? Um, in a sense, what creates success is when there is synchronicity, right, in attachments. So you get them to understand their attachment style, right? A lot has been written now these days about, how attachment style influences our ability to connect in a healthy way. So if you suffer from an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment or an ambivalent attachment, what does that mean for your relationship, right? You have an anxious attachment, that means you're often leery and reticent to get close. If you have an avoidant attachment, that means you're fearful with trepidation, you know. If you have an ambivalent attachment, that means it's imbued with uncertainty, that lack of stick-to-itness. So understanding your attachment style also helps you in creating connection.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to this, and I'm thinking, yeah, yeah, I could, I quite like the way that this happens. So in other words, you're kind of, analyzing it and getting there. But then you scared me when you said about communication and finding out what my partner thinks about me, right?
This
Or
is
my wife.
one for many people.
Yeah, I mean,
They haven't thought about it before. Maybe because of a tendency to be more self-focused, on what is it you like or you want, or what is it you're actually getting, and to move beyond that into what about your partner, their connection to you, you know, is it what you think it is, and the willingness to ask them. In couple therapy, it happens a lot. In individual therapy, I get them to think about it, but in couple therapy, they're sitting there and they're going to tell you, yeah, the order of my connection is this. What I got with you is not my preference, but I'm living with it or I'm dealing with it. I prefer a head, heart, crotch connection, but with you, I got a heart, crotch, head connection, that order. So in therapy, I would get them to approximate, right? Percentage wise, for example. Your head connection, what is it? 70%? Your heart is 20 and your crotch is 10? Or is it your crotch is 50 and the head is 20 and the other one is 30? So getting them to even approximate percentage-wise the nature of their connection was helpful to them, you know? So if I only had a 10% heart connection, I got to work on that, right? That's what needs to be worked on, you know, because they come in again, not quite clear what the disconnection is exactly. So you get them to label it, approximate it, percentage, then they can something, the tool that they can use to establish a conversation, at least.
So if they uncover, for instance, I don't know, one of them that's way out, I don't know, maybe, for instance, um, the emotional side. No, not the emotional. Let's look at the intellectual side, okay? Because I think that's probably something that would come across, especially in this day and age of this social media or the internet kind of dating kind of thing. Um, so intellectually, then, if someone falls, I don't know, or someone says, "Oh yeah, I used to like this person for because it was 70% intellectual or whatever, and now it's come back, it's gone right down to 10% of that,
Well, you
or even love or heart or whatever it is." I mean,
you would
w- w-
explore what happened. What
hmm.
happened to your initial impression? If it was 70% your attraction to that person, what did he have that got him that 70%? Was it because he was wise and rational and brilliant, objective, sophisticated? What happened along the way? How did he become inflexible, prejudicial, judgment? Did that actually occur? Or is that in your head? Is that your perception? Or is it reality? Can you reframe your thoughts? For example, if it started positively and it moved in the negative direction, can you recall times in your life experience when that wasn't the case? You know? So it's about imagination, it's about fantasy, you know. If it doesn't happen in reality, can it happen in fantasy? You know? So
That's interesting.
can
That's
you
an interesting point.
reframe and recreate your inner attachments, in other words? Or have you totally lost those initial perceptions that you had? Because it does change over time. Even the order of your connection can change over time. It changes with age, you know? What you initially, and that has been my experience in therapy, that what initially attracted to someone, whether it was that order, head, heart, crotch, 10 years later, it's no longer that order, you know? It's changed. You appreciate other things about them, perhaps their heart above their intellect or their sexual connection, you know? Or you appreciate them more sexually after 10 years than you did initially, you know? So connections are not fixed and inflexible, you know? They're not static, they're fluid and they move, you know? Both the order and your preference as well. Mhm.
Rene, this is complicated stuff, complex stuff, right?
It's complex, yet it's very simple if you think about it,
Yeah.
because it's a formula, right? Mental, emotional, physical. Do you mentally enjoy that person and esteem them? Do you emotionally appreciate the emotional expression towards you? And sexually, are you pleased and satisfied with the sexual encounter? Is it mutually gratifying? Because based on the studies about sex, the thing that's most relevant to a successful sexual union is mutual gratification. That's the number one factor that bonds people. If they're not mutually satisfied, there's where it starts going downhill. You know,
I can imagine. I mean, because the other person is just left behind, right? No, I see that.
when fantasy enters, wherever you have a weakness in one of those three spheres, that's where you begin to look outside, right? So if you don't have an intellectual connection with your partner, what do? You start looking for people outside you who you connect with intellectually. If you don't have an emotional connection, you start looking for that, someone who you connect with emotionally. And clearly, if you don't have a sexual connection, that is probably what you're going to look for in an affair, a sexual relationship, right? So it's important to identify where is it that it's faltering. so that you can work on it to avoid that displacement outside of the relationship.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that this is the point, isn't it? It's about communicating and understanding, and also I know that's trite to say, actually, communicating and understanding. Of course it is, but yeah, I think that this is where a book like yours that looks at it from a different point of view actually helps a lot, because yes, it's complicated. I think it's complicated, right? You got to think about it, or maybe think about that. But I think your book is probably going to help everybody. I mean, you know. Give us an example of people, because you are a practicing psychotherapist. I mean, you've heard countless personal stories. So obviously in confidence, without really revealing anything, was there a particular experience that our listeners and viewers can sort of like get behind, that you can share with us, that reinforce really the importance of all of those ideas, and to try and get people to not be concerned about it, read the book, take the instructions, and change their lives for the better, really?
In the book, I do give a lot of several case examples of people that I've worked with and explaining where were they when they first met the person, what was their preference, what was their order of connection. And because I worked with them over time, what they first came in with was not what they wound up understanding by the end, of the therapy. Uh, Many times a relationship was saved by connecting in a different way, by reevaluating what was missing, working on it, and it taking more importance than another level of connection. So when they were missing the emotional connection and they thought they only had a sexual or physical or intellectual connection, they worked on talking with their partner about the lack of emotional connectivity, right? And what they felt they needed emotionally from that person. Once they started getting it or failed to get it, it determined whether they were able to stay in the relationship or leave it. If they never got what they needed, they came to the realization that this is not working. So there were cases where, as a result of analyzing the head, heart, crotch, they broke up. The other person was not willing to connect in the way they felt they needed. But in most of the times, exploring the connections actually helped improve. You know, it didn't cause a separate disconnect, it caused more of a connection. And in the book, I give, you know, 5 or 6 case examples of how that occurred, you know.
Ah, excellent. Okay, well, that's good. I think we all learn, don't we, through case studies, and. So we're running out of time, though, Renee. I mean, this is always the problem with these conversations, because this is fascinating stuff. But we've still got time for a few more questions. So, I mean, was there anything you discovered while writing the book that challenged your own thinking about relationships?
I mean, I think there were 3 chapters that I enjoyed the most writing about, and those chapters were on how trauma affects our connections. Another chapter that was called How Familiarity Breeds Contempt. And then, of course, a chapter on age and how age affects our connections. Um, I think I learned the most from that because I've worked with so many people who've had traumatic life experiences from abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse as children, and how that um, affected their ability to connect in a healthy way as adults. You know, um, Helping them to see the difference, for example, between shame and guilt. When you suffer from toxic shame, how does that affect your ability, your thoughts, your emotions, and your sexual nature? Um, the difference between feelings and emotions, that they're not the same thing, that they use interchangeably, but feelings are not the same things as emotions. Emotions are subconscious. Um, Feelings are at a conscious level. Psychologists have only identified like about 6 different emotions: happiness, sadness, disgust, fear, surprise, and anger. But there are many more feeling states than there are emotions. Feelings are the outward representations of your emotions. So teaching my clients, my patients, to identify feelings from emotions, that was something that I learned was so beneficial, helping them understand toxic shame, issues like toxic masculinity. How does that work itself out in a relationship? How it could be destructive to a relationship, you know? Um, the issue of age, do we um do we appreciate an older person because of how long they've lived, or all the right things they've done, or because they've lived so long they've made a lots of mistakes, right? As a, through age, you learn a lot. It's a whole old expression. Um, so appreciating the changes that occur with age, that has been a learning experience for me, which I talk a lot about in the book. You know, and like I said, in trauma, how trauma in childhood affects us. You know,
Totally. Oh, very wise. I'm going to say, I mean, yeah, exactly. I think the age thing, so for me anyway, is really interesting. Obviously, the 25-year relationship and getting on in age a bit, things do change. And you mentioned this earlier on as well about how the ratios between head, heart, crotch can change and move and all those things. And I think it's important that everybody understands that as they move on. I mean, at the end of the day, especially nowadays, it appears that lots of divorces are happening later in marriages. So people are married for, I don't know, 20, 25 years, say, and then they break up. And for some reason, they just realize they want to go their own way and they want to do their own thing. But I think that people kind of like agree with that to do it, right? Because it's just, whatever. But I think that always leaves one victim at the end, right? That actually doesn't feel like that. I mean, and phew, that must be really tough. So what sort of advice would you give to people who are in that position, for instance, who are older, who have been together for a long time or a relatively long time, and they just like there's nothing there as far as they're concerned. What do you think?
that nothing exists anymore for them in terms of the connection to their partner. Is that what?
Wake up in the morning, yeah, it's like, oh yeah, all right, hi, how you doing, whatever. But yes, there's no connection that they feel, and this is what I was saying about older people getting divorced.
Connections are also a choice. You can choose to work on them or you could choose to avoid them. And again, relationships will either evolve or they'll fail to thrive, you know. Um, and I offer, I believe, actionable advice of how you can relive them, how you can make them thrive again, you know. But it's a choice, it's a conscious choice that one makes. Um, Also, in my book, I give them a scale that they can use to rate themselves and rate their connection from very connected to somewhat connected to neither connected, disconnected to somewhat disconnected to very disconnected. When you use that scale and you look at it and you explore it, you see where you are personally, and where you need to explore more, look at, you know. So in my book, the acculturation, the connection scale is used as a tool for people to begin to identify where they're at, you know. Um, and it's given free on my website. So even if they don't read the book, they could use the tool, the scale, to analyze where they're at, you know.
Perfect. I mean, when you were saying it's a choice, right? It's kind of, and I go, oh yeah, yeah, of course it's a choice, like really glibly. But that's not a simple choice, right? It's not something.
Simple choice, but it is within one's volition and one's agency to make that decision based on some analysis. You know, you may find that you've lost that head heart crotch connection. It happens. That might be the decision you need to say it's over. I'm stuck here, but I need to move on. Right? That's equally valid. You know, not every relationship can be saved. Some
No,
to separate and move on. Mhm.
exactly. Now I remember I was specifically asking about that because my grandparents, I think when I was 70, oh no, when they were 70, my grandmother said, I've had enough of this. This is it. I'm out of here. And she went to move to Vancouver like for like 6 months or a year, whatever it was. But she came back, to be fair. and they kind of continued until they, well, were no longer alive. So, you know, and they were married all their lives. So they did pretty well, I think, you know.
My grandma
Yeah.
married at 80, found some,
They got,
and she described the nature of her connection to him. She lasted 10 years until they passed, but it was her happiest 10 years of her life, you know?
see, oh my gosh, that's really good. That's really good news, isn't it? Because this is what I'm saying about the older people, you know, about being, and they don't have to be 80 or 70, you know, be 60, 50, 40, whatever, you know, they're not 20 swiping left, right, and all that sort of stuff, right? I mean, if we're going into second relationships, third relationships, fourth, what, you know, I mean, serious relationships, you know, we're in a situation where we need to be thinking like you've mentioned. So brilliant. René, we need to bring this to a close though. So you mentioned on your website, you're giving away advice. Obviously, you're giving away bits and pieces. What's the website address?
It's www.dr for doctor, vdelv.com. So it's Vázquez del Valle, so it's drvdelv.com. Yeah.
drvdv.com. Excellent. Okay. Don't worry.
Right, .com.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We'll put it in the description as well, but don't worry. But I think it's really nice of you to be able to give that to people. So, well, there we are. We are out of time now. So, Dr. René.
Shows that
Sorry.
the book has been translated into Spanish. So there's the Spanish version as well, and it's called Cabeza, Corazón, Cuerpo, Conexiones. So it's in English and Spanish, you know?
So that is good. And I meant to ask you about that. So thank you for pointing that out. We'll put all of those on the links and in the description down below. So, you know, don't worry, that'll be there. And everybody, you know, this is great. So you're dealing with English language, dealing with Spanish language. That's all you need is Mandarin, and you'll be away. So there we are. Dr. René Vázquez del Valle. I mean, you know, thank you very much for joining me on Author Conversations.
Well, thank
so
you for having me.
No, not at all. Head, Heart, Crotch Connections offers a thoughtful and practical look at why relationships succeed. And Dr. René Vázquez del Valle, you have been fantastic to talk to about this. I mean, you've explained how, well, basically relationships can fail and how greater understanding of ourselves can help us build stronger, healthier relationships, I think. And if you'd like to know more about Dr. René and his work, you'll find links to the book and his author page. As I say, we'll make sure they're in the description below. And don't forget, of course, that if you've enjoyed this conversation, please follow Author Conversations for more interviews with writers, experts, and thought leaders exploring the ideas behind their books. So, Dr. René Vázquez del Valle, thank you very much for joining me again. It's been an absolute insight to talk to you about this. And I'm going to walk out of my studio and go and see my wife and see what she has to say about everything. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you can watch more Author Conversations here.